The illustrious Jabba bids you welcome. I'm going to regret this.
I'm Pete Mitchell. He's Peyton Jones. And this is the Church Planter Podcast, brought to you by Church Planter Magazine.
Today's episode of the podcast is sponsored by Portable Church Industries over at portablechurch.com. So I'm getting ready to plant a church again. And here's the deal. The most valuable resource you have is people. So the important thing to remember is it's worth making an investment in the people that are serving your team, your setup, your teardown, all of that. And Portable Church has actually made that a whole heck of a lot easier so that you're looking after your greatest resource, your people. Make the setup and teardown of your church easy, logical, and play a game of Tetris when you're packing up and unpacking. And trust me, that will pay out dividends to your church plant in a way you never expected before. Again, head on over to portablechurch.com. And remember, if we don't believe in it, we're not going to tell you about it. portablechurch.com.
But you know what's better than that, actually, is having an established building. You don't got to pack up every week. Oh, wait, wrong thing to say after a sponsor, huh? Sorry.
Hey,
welcome to the Church Planter Podcast. Oh, wait, hey,
Church
that's your
Planter.
line.
This is Pete Mitchell, and that was Peyton Jones.
Hey, but if you like anything from this podcast, please send the appreciation letters to me. And, if you don't like anything, it's probably Pete, because, recently we've gotten some comments where people have gotten us a little confused.
I would just like to point out that we had someone else reach out to us about sponsoring the podcast. And so I think you're feeling a little randy with Portable Church. Because
I'm not, but I listened to an old podcast from, I don't remember which one it was, but dude, it was I think it was Preaching Series number 8. Can you believe that? And it just came up on my iTunes. For some reason, it was in my iTunes and it was on autoplay. And I decided to give it a listen, and it was funny. I mean, normally I don't think I'm funny, and our podcast is, it is what we're just talking. But I was listening.
I normally think I'm funny.
Oh, man, I'm telling you what. I was like, this is like, we're not trying to be funny every time we get on here, but I think Pete and we amuse ourselves. And that's part of just what this friendship is, but it's two guys amusing themselves. Why did that sound wrong?
Hold on. Alexa, turn off my office lights.
You're just showing off now.
Wait. I'm trying to see if I can trigger anyone else's office lights in their office.
You remember that when we used to do that?
Yes. Alexa, turn on my office fans. Oh, much better. It's getting too hot here in the old Mitchell office.
That's so funny. Yeah, we used to trigger. That's right. We'd be like, hey, Siri.
We did. We did. We saw one commercial that someone was messing around with the Google Home, whatever it is. I don't have one. And we were like, oh, we got to do that. We're like, hey, Siri, go to PeytonJones.ninja and stuff like that.
Hey, Siri, mail off a check. Make an automatic deposit of $5,000 to the next Nigerian prince that emails me. Something like that.
I like it. So what's new with you this last week?
Dude. I missed my calling as a lawyer, apparently.
Oh,
I
yeah?
know you will find that hard to believe, but I had 100-and-something page document that I had to send to one of my relatives who's an attorney to look over for a little matter that I'm entangled in at the moment regarding my house. And he was like, dude, you missed your calling as a lawyer. That is fine work. So
nice.
Yeah, it was kind of cool, but I had blood drawn this morning.
Ooh.
So I'm a little dizzy, a little punch drunk. And little.
Are they
bit
checking for
deprived of my
anything,
own
or is
juices.
this just keep you healthy type stuff?
I have to get this. I have to get this physical every year for my job. And if I go get a physical, they dump money in my health account. So I go get my physical.
I wouldn't, but hey, I think that's great.
Hey man, it's good money. I mean, I can't argue with it.
I've been debating whether or not I should go to the old urgent care, but I have not. I've said, hey, you know what? Psh, nothing's gonna happen. Petey's invincible. Petey's gonna live forever.
Hey, left arm radiating, a little bit of pain and numbness, shortness of breath, anxiety, and the feeling like an elephant on my chest. What could go? I mean, really, what could that be? I don't see any blood.
Is that from a movie? Because that was like too quick.
Well, it's my nursing knowledge coming out.
Wow. That's funny.
You just thought I was a pretty man in high heels.
I didn't think you were a pretty man.
That's probably good. It makes it easier to work with you.
Yeah, I don't know, man. I'm trying to think what has happened over the last week. I had to have had a lot of stuff happen.
I did read an old review of us, and it was I came, speaking of Nigerian princes, have you ever gone into the messages on the Church Planter Magazine Facebook page?
I saw you having a conversation with someone.
Yeah. Yeah, so I had a little conversation with a dude, and I was like, that was cool. But he was the first legit guy ever to be on there, I think, in like years. And everyone else is like Nigerian princes. So
we do get a lot of the Nigerian princes. I'm a pastor over here. Can you help support us? Send us some money.
Right. Yeah, that's primarily what we get. And so I was like, I said, hey, sure, I'd love that. Are you a Nigerian prince? And of course, he didn't think that was funny. But then I scrolled down and I saw an old review. And he was like, I listened to this. And he bagged on me a bit. And he said, I would have thought someone who lived in the UK. Now, he was upset at your gun talk, and they're a little sensitive over there. But I was thinking to myself,
hey, back-to-back World War champs over here. That's all I got to say to our friends in the UK.
2-time world champions in the biggest international sport ever played. So, it's funny because, never mind the fact that I'm always silent in almost every conversation. I'm saying, well, I don't have guns, or I think ninja stars or whatever.
I didn't see this review.
He was mad. He was like,
what did he say?
You have to go in there. And, obviously he was listening when you were on your, we followed Pete through his underwear craze, his charger phase, his gun phase. It'll be something next, just stay. We have about one of these a year. Right, that we're doing this together. So,
I'm now incredibly curious because I don't remember this.
Yeah, well, hey, take a moment, familiarize yourself, and we will flame him.
Oh, really? It was one of those. It was a bad review.
Oh, well, I don't know if it was a bad review. No, he just messaged us, and he was just sharing. He was disappointed.
Oh, really?
With you mostly. With me slightly. In fact, it was probably more like, Peyton Jones should have known better. It's probably worse for him, And I'm thinking, I'm the guy the whole time that's like, hey, man, let's move on. Let's talk about something else because I have nothing to say on the topic. But no, he was mad. And at the end, though, he did say, when it did finally get around to spiritual things, I did agree with everything Peyton said. And then he goes, but I learned my lesson.
Really?
Hey.
This was on Facebook?
Yeah, it was on our page. If you go into the messengers and you weed your way, and kind of weed out all the Nigerian princes, you'll find.
Man, how do I do this? Now I'm like, I got to go look at this.
You know what? It's hard. I don't know why it's so hard. That's why I never look at them. It's like a maze to try to get in there.
We actually have a prince reach out to us.
Yeah.
Did you see that one?
Yeah, no, it's not that one, but, Hey, if you are a Nigerian prince, though, we don't mean to make fun of you. Particularly if you have money, just donate it. Like, don't even email us. Just reach out. We'll take it. We'll accept it. We don't want to interact with you. Like, we don't want to be your friend or anything, but we'll take the money, You know, Pete, it's funny because you might think with his red hair and baby white skin that there's no way he could be tied to a Nigerian prince. But I'll have you know, if Pete does a saliva swab and the DNA genetics test that you mail away for, we'd probably all be in for a surprise. He'd probably be on the next commercial going, hey, I thought for sure I was of Irish and Scottish descent, but I did the test and I'm related to a Nigerian prince. And I made $2.1 million. And then it'll say in parentheses, over his lifetime.
Yeah, I am a Nigerian prince.
Pete, you're whatever you want to be.
Well, for all of our friends in the UK, I am actually going to another shooting training this evening. This will be support hand training. That's where you shoot one-handed with your non-dominant hand. So I'm a righty, and I'll be shooting lefty. And, we got to practice for... we had another shooting yesterday. Actually, I think they wanted it to be bigger than it was. Like, that was what I took away from the media. At first, it was like, 6 people died, and then it was 4 people died, and then it was... 2 people died and the guy killed himself. And it kept going down and down and down.
It was like that. It's funny you mention that because it actually was a little bit like There Were Sharks for Blood. Actually, there's a famous, not so famous, I knew who he was, but on Twitter, there was a gamer who was there who won the 2000, I don't know what year, championship, like 16 or something. And he got he got shot in the thumb. Which for
really?
him. Yeah,
wow.
I mean that's.
Hey, I don't care where you get shot. Getting shot is not like
no kidding, right?
I mean,
you'd rather it be a finger than an abdomen. You know what I'm saying? But he just was saying, "Wow, I'm really fortunate. You just survived." And there was a media guy, like a journalist, who goes, "Hey, I am so sorry to hear about this. Obviously, your safety is of utmost concern and top priority. But when you get a minute, call me." It was kind of like. And people just started trashing this dude hey man, show respect. And then all the bad stories that everyone's like, when my father was murdered, the media, it was bad. And I was just like, yeah, dude, you really gotta but they were like sharks, in a feeding.
They really were. And it's kind of interesting to me because, we talked about this last week that I'm really wondering, are we seeing the end of modern civilization? I mean, certainly pleasantries are gone nowadays. There's no discussing. We can't disagree on issues without someone calling the other one a Nazi. That's just how we talk now.
My favorite little golden book is called Everyone Who Disagrees with Me is Hitler.
Oh,
and
really?
Then it says, and then the subtitle is a children's online guide to political discussion.
Wow.
And it's got Hitler riding on a sled through space with a rainbow trailing behind him. It's a great picture.
I was thinking about this morning. I was like, okay, so Trump keeps getting closer and closer to either getting impeached or who knows, right? Even though the whole Russian thing was, it's been proven to be a hoax. It doesn't matter. They've taken it and they're going for blood. Neither side likes this guy. Republicans don't like him. Democrats don't like him. Right. And the whole time I'm sitting there watching this going, okay, we got literally the Catholic Church is now imploding. We got mega churches across our nation imploding. I think we might be watching the United States implode. I'm like, so is this how the end times actually comes around? Is everything just gone? I don't know, man.
Yeah, it's hard to say, man.
I don't know.
And here's the thing. Just a little word to our UK friend who I didn't even bother to check the date. It was, I figured it was sometime in the last year, being that it was bagging on Pete's gun.
Yeah, no, it could have been any time. Let's be fair.
Could have been what? Anytime?
It could have been any time.
Well, here's the thing. Welcome to Smack Talk, by the way. Ladies and gents, we speak to church planners. And when I hear a guy who's like, hey, by the time I got spiritual, I'm thinking, kind of like Jesus said to the Pharisees, you know neither the scriptures nor what it says about such and such. Here's the deal. And I know those are fighting words, but here's the deal. Everything is spiritual, my friend. Your theology is just a little bit off. The reason Pete and I talk about this stuff is we're two guys who are on mission, who are doing outreach, who are talking about things that people are thinking about. Now, we might screw around a bunch in smack talk because it's part of our personality coming out. Lloyd Jones used to say that preaching was truth mediated through personality. So Spurgeon, for example, he was very humorous when he preached. Lloyd Jones was not. And that's because personality is the mediation that the truth comes through. So what you're hearing on here is you're hearing our personality. We say we're screwing around, but at the same time, we are discussing things that are pertinent to, to life in general and what people are thinking about. If you're a church planner, you need to be thinking, kind of like you need to be thinking about these things, because these are the gospel ends that you're going to have with people. Kind of like Joe Strummer from The Clash said. He said, if you ain't thinking about life and God and politics, you ain't thinking about nothing, right? You should be thinking and constantly processing. I'm a missionary. So the reason I spent time in the UK, my UK friend, was because I left my own culture, went to your culture, and had to ask the question, why is UK culture failing miserably to reach its own? Just like America is right now. I came back, and when I left, America wasn't doing too bad. When I came back, it's doing horrible. And all I draw as a conclusion of the matter is that we are simply following the Brits, and we are behind the Brits. Now, the Brits the churches have definitely gained some toughness. They've gained some resilience. They've gained a lot of cool stuff. But I got to be honest, when I lived there, the cultural divide, I would see people come and get saved in the factory. They would come to church with me on Sunday, not a church I planted, but a church that I served with when I first got there. And they'd be like, dude, this is so far removed from real life. And that was God planting the seeds of church planting. So I would challenge back, and I would say Smack Talk is, if nothing else, a showcase of two guys on mission processing life. And for us, when you're on mission and you're talking to non-believers, you're constantly processing everything in culture. I posted on Facebook a couple days ago, and then I'll stop my salty rant. But the Think Christian website is my favorite for this reason. It doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't matter if Chris Cornell commits suicide. It doesn't matter if Batman declares he's an atheist in a comic book. They're going to talk about it. If someone comes out with a new album that hints at something that talks about redemption, they're going to post it, because there's always a bridge. We are spiritual beings. Therefore, everything going on is spiritual. Jesus told the Pharisees, how is it that you can't discern the times? And so, Pete, when you said that just a minute ago, it kicked me off a little bit. I feel that many of our religious leaders today, they can read the weather, like Jesus said, but they can't discern the times.
Yeah, well, that's a little bit deeper than I was thinking of going.
That's what I'm here for. See, you're here to look pretty and be funny. I'm here to say intelligent things.
Well,
no, I'm teasing.
No, in all honesty, though, I do look at this. I look at what's happening to our country and the fact that no one will talk to each other. Like, they just won't. They won't talk to each other. And I'm like, okay, what happens if they actually get Trump removed from office?
Right.
And I'm like, okay, do you guys realize that all of his supporters are like massive gun owners, and they're half like crazed right now anyway? I'm like,
right.
And I'm not trying to say if you're a Trump supporter, you're crazed. I mean, as we've said on the show, I'm not a Trump supporter. You're not a Trump supporter. We didn't vote for either of the major political parties. We're not registered. Well, actually, I don't know if you did or not. I know I didn't. We didn't. Neither one of us are Republicans or Democrats. We're both independents. So I'm not saying this like from any particular stamp, but I'm like, man, dude, okay, what's going to happen if, like, I genuinely wonder, are we looking down the barrel of another civil war in America? Because neither side will talk to each other. They just won't even talk. We can't talk to each other. It's just so ridiculous.
Okay.
But
yeah, no, I totally, man, I'm not going to disagree there. And I think that what we've done is we've demonized
yes,
the other side. Like for example, we all know that Trump said ridiculous things about McCain. Things where you go, dude, how are you even president again? Like, you did you really, like I tweeted, I don't speak out often, but when he called, I can't remember her name.
Omarosa.
Yeah, when he called her a dog. And I was like,
ridiculous.
and we commented on it last week. Like, you don't do that to a woman.
You don't
like
do that to anyone. I mean, especially as the president, have
Correct.
a little bit of, restraint. And,
But
I'm
it's
not
even lower, though, when you see the president addressing the guy who ought to be embodying what it means to be a diplomatic statesman, a gentleman, the gentleman of gentlemen. And he, that is the role. I'm sorry. People go, times change. They shouldn't. They shouldn't. There's too many lives and too much at risk for people sitting in their armchairs eating their potato chips, watching Fox News to comment and say, well, times have changed, or whatever news channel. It doesn't have to be Fox. I'm not taking a swipe there. That just came to mind. But here's the deal. The president of the United States is the most powerful man on the planet. And like Uncle Ben said to Peter Parker, see, I had to go there. With great power comes great responsibility. And if all you know about politics is what you learn from Uncle Ben and being president, you learn from Spider-Man, that's enough.
Yeah.
But, at the end of the day, man, I mean, I'm just looking at it that, but the media last night, I was going to bed, and my wife and I were talking about it, how their headline was how he refused to give it. And then he tweeted something specifically to the family, doesn't undo what he said, this and that. But everything's just being so demonized and misrepresented on both sides.
On both sides. That's the key.
That you're just like, you know what? Like, I'm not a defender of Trump. I mean, just even if you just saw that tweet, you didn't even you wouldn't need any news headlines. You would just read that and go, oh, dude, that doesn't undo everything that you said to this guy when he was coming out of brain surgery. Like, you really screwed up. Imagine, I just want people for a second to imagine the qualifications for a minister that Paul has, right? And he just says things like, must not be angry, must be of good reputation. That's for a minister of the gospel, right? It's not a far stretch to say, well, if a minister of the gospel in Paul's day, they weren't like pastors of thousands typically. You had Ephesus and you had Antioch and you had Jerusalem, but typically, they were small. And Paul says, hey, if you're going to lead a small bunch of people, you got to have these qualities of character. And so, like I said, man, I'm a little old school on this. I do feel the character of the president ought to be there because of the power.
It totally does. Are you kidding me? You represent.
It's okay if he's a tyrant.
You represent us to the world. Like, despite what you do to the people in your own country, you're representing us to the world.
Well, that's it. And we're real quick to go after other leaders on bad character, right? Oh, Kim Jong-il, he has no character. Saddam Hussein, he has no character, We'll be quick to talk about how someone else has no character and therefore they ought to be removed. And I'm not saying to vote. I do think how people are saying, oh, remove Trump. It's just, like, just play the game. You lost the election. Just play the game.
Well, that's definitely the way that I feel about it. I mean, I may not have voted for the guy, but give me a break, dude. Yeah. It's like,
stop crying for the guy to be removed because you didn't like the way the vote turned out. Like,
and here's the thing. Here's
democracy, people.
Exactly. I mean, we, as a conservative, when Obama got elected, I wasn't like, oh, we got to get him out of office. It was like, dude, he's the president. We got to suck it up for 4 years. Oh, man, 8, right? It was like one of those. But it wasn't like the temper tantrum that we have today. But let's be fair about this. Like, there was a unique vacuum in politics at the moment where you could have a guy like Trump who literally just bags on everyone tearing them down publicly. And everyone was like, yeah, that's what we need. We need someone to finally tell these guys off. And that got him elected.
That was it. You had the absence of anyone who seemed like they had a backbone or something really to say. And I think that's why Bernie Sanders, for at least a big cross-section of America, he had something to say. And for those of you that are like, oh my gosh, I did not support Bernie Sanders at all. But again, this is what we're saying is people aren't able to talk to each other anymore.
Yeah.
Like if you're ready to turn this off, you're just part of the problem because you're, oh, I can't hear that. You know, at least I thought I was safe here. Pete and I are backing up and talking critically. We're just trying to critically think and observe and stand outside here. Because Pete and I are both neutral. We've always been neutral on this podcast. And we've always
we're neutral in the sense that, well, I can speak for myself here. I'm so conservative. I haven't had a politician in any election, I think, since I was born. So, like, no one speaks for me. I'm way too conservative for all of that. But like one of the things, and I mentioned this, months ago, one of the things that I had to do was I had to turn off certain Facebook groups that I was a part of.
Right.
Because the memes that they would post to me were so stinking funny and accurate, but I realized it's not helping the conversation. And I still catch myself to this day, right? So I'm not trying to say I'm innocent and I don't like repost someone else's memes, but it was like a lot harder for me when I was constantly being flooded with, memes and stuff that would not help the conversation. They would just be funny to me and I would repost. And I'm like, that's not the right thing to do. Like I can't have a conversation with someone I disagree with when, I'm putting a smackdown on them every time they look at my Facebook feed.
Right.
And I know I would say that probably most pastors are a lot better than I am. That's just, well.
I don't know, man. I don't know. I think people like living in an echo chamber because for me, right, like I think there's great stock in the way the British do it, right? They have that shadow cabinet where it's the opposing parties and they make a cabinet of advisors from the opposing side. And it brings balance so that you're still leading the country together. But the shadow cabinet is not, they're not the ones in power. And that is such a healthy system that you've got, you're still getting that input and people are still, for the good of the country, trying to move the ball forward. And you're hearing those perspectives. That, to me, is where we've lost. And I think that's what McCain embodied to a lot of people was, they said that he could cross the aisle. And, some people are like, that's traitorous. No, he was trying to get things done for the good of America. And I think that's where other people appreciated him was he was like, well, look, we've got things we disagree on, but we've also got things we agree on. Let's move forward together on those. And I'm going to be a gentleman and I'm going to reach across and shake your hand, give you the respect. Now, for me, politics is because on the one hand, I'm talking about this guy ought to have character and he ought to hold himself a certain way. And yet I don't trust any of them. Right. So I never pin my hopes to politicians.
Yeah.
And so I'm saying this in theory only, realizing that for me, my view of the presidency is you might go in there with ideals, but probably the truth is you probably pretty much fried your character to get there in the first place. Not necessarily always, but probably by the time you leave, you've gotten your hands so dirty that you probably, you got to go to bed at night thinking the ends justifies the means.
Well, look at this latest thing to come out in the New York Times, the sex abuse fund that Congress has. Over $15 million have been paid out to sex abuse victims by congressional members. And
You're kidding me.
Oh, no, the New York Times just came out with this weekend. It's a secret fund, and they showed this is the act that Congress passed. You can't go public in the era of the Me Too movement if you've you have to go through their channels. They're trying to save themselves.
Oh my gosh!
And over $15 million
of
corruption given out.
It is, yeah.
But my point is what you're saying is true. To reach that point, you were probably so corrupt. And I mean, you don't have to be, but I mean, come on. It's like
you can't give people power and tell them to be good boys with all that power.
Well, they're not being good boys with it. That's for sure.
No, there's psychological things that happen.
Well, think about it in our churches. And I know this is part of where we're going to go today.
Into our talk today.
Yeah. I mean, look at it in our churches. We're seeing more and more mega churches crumble. And we got these powers that have been given this, pseudo, I don't want to call it power, but
it is power.
It's an authoritative position. It's a, I don't even know what to call it, but I mean,
if you've ever been in a church, and all of you guys have,
hopefully if you're listening to this podcast.
Well, and normally, like there are denominations out there that it's a little bit more checks and balances. But I think the Presbyterians, they probably are the closest thing to getting this right, where there's just a lot of accountability. You have a team of elders, and then you have a greater team of elders called a presbytery, where they come together and decisions are made where guys can't just run off and do whatever the heck they want. I'm sure there's abuses there too. But my point is, we've all been in churches where the pastor's kind of like the boss CEO, and if you disagree with him on the wrong things, you're gone, right? I mean, because of the way that it's set up, which ought not be. So therefore, the guy, if he decides he wants to take these trips, he takes them. Nobody questions. If he decides, hey, I need this, he gets it, and nobody questions. If he says, hey, I feel the Lord telling me we're going to go this direction as a church, and therefore we're going to need to start this new building project, the church better get in line. The leadership, the elders better get in line. No one wants to oppose what God is telling our supreme leader. So because of that, there is a lot of room for abuse. If you want to stay on this panel, you better get in line, It's not good, man.
Yeah. Yeah. So should we actually break into our topic?
We probably should, because our topic is a little bit different.
Our smack talk wasn't nearly as fun as it normally is.
Well, no, it wasn't fun, but that's okay, because I think to a certain degree, it just needs to be what it is. It's two guys talking. These are more serious topics. And also, too, man, the thing, to be honest, I am heavy-hearted coming into this topic today. There was a minister in the Inland Empire here in California who tragically took his own life. And I guess I don't know many details at all. In fact, I don't want to focus on him because, it's just not honoring. It's not fair. I don't. And when I say it's not fair, I don't want to speculate because I know nothing. Not because I have a judgment on it. You know what I mean? Like, when I say it's not fair, it's just I don't know anything about it. I just read it. I have to say, it haunted me all weekend. It colored everything that I thought about, everything that I read, everything I saw, every posting about church. And I know that he was a minister, a young man. He was caught up in one of these churches, big non-denominational church. I believe he planted it, although I'm not sure. But it kind of had like a Hillsong vibe. I listened to his final message that was preached over the weekend, and he was very honest. Like, I got to say, like, as I looked at him in the pictures that they're posting, I felt for him because he seemed like a normal guy. But when I watched his final message, knowing what I know as a psych nurse and just kind of knowing what happened afterwards, going back and watching that sermon, they had given him a 3-month sabbatical, and he had come back, and he was just, you could tell he was struggling up there under those lights. He wasn't better. He wasn't okay. 3 months wasn't enough. It was almost kind of like, here's 3 months, which was very compassionate. And yet, what do you do when your pastor comes back from a sabbatical after 3 months and he's not better? Do you tell him fake it till you make it? Just go up and, make the people happy, dance so they keep throwing coin up on the stage? What do you do in that situation? Because he was the teaching pastor. Do you It's hard to say. And my heart just really went out for him because I could see up there, like, he wasn't okay. And I don't think a lot of people would pick up on it other than he was tripping over his words. And man, it bothered me. And I thought, man, I'm sure that dude was very, very loved. And he seemed like a good dude. And when he was up there, it was really interesting because this is what really, as I was watching, I was like, wow, good for you, man. Like he had been sharing. He hadn't been hiding it. He had been sharing with the church that he had had suicidal thoughts and been fighting depression. And he had been very open with the congregation. He was announcing a series that was coming up. And he was saying, we're going to keep, it was about David. And of course, that David had depression, at times. And Spurgeon used to quote David often from the Psalms because David is very naked with his emotions. And in this sermon, the guy was announcing they had a series called Dave coming up. And he was saying, I took a 3-month break and I've shared it with you and been open and people with depression. And he was actually, you could see like he was trying to help people who were where he was at. And it just was breaking my heart the more I watched. And at a certain point I had to turn it off because it was just getting me too down. And, so it's just tragic. But I just thought to myself, I know, and I frequently counsel ministers to take off as long as they need. I don't care if it's a year. We will find within the New Breed Network that I founded, when we had guys go off, it was always, hey, that's what the network's here for. We will cover it for you, but don't worry about coming back. You need to not worry about that at all. You won't get healthy if you're thinking, I got 3 months. That 3 months is going to be looming over you and creating all this pressure. You need that pressure off. You need to almost look at a dude and say, take as long as you need, up into, and then maybe you say a year. Because I'm sorry, but depression takes time, man. That's not an overnight thing. What a lot of people don't realize is the medications for antidepressant medicines often can take months to kick in. And that's simply because the brain can't take water-soluble medication. So things that dissolve in your blood are water-soluble. The brain has a barrier. And so the only things that can get past the brain-blood membrane is it's a protective membrane around the brain. It has to be fat-soluble. So with psychotropic medications, everything that affects the brain has to be fat-soluble. And that takes time. It doesn't, you have to give weird doses and there's a lot of adjustment. It's like when you give someone hormone medication, like when they lose their thyroid. It's a giant experiment that happens over time. And so for this guy, I don't know at what point he may have or may have not gone on medication, but the reality is you can't tell someone 3 months. And I'm not blaming. I'm not shifting blame at all. And I don't know the details, and that's why. But I'm speaking generally here, right? That we have to be extremely careful how we deal with people. And I'm hoping that this will raise a little bit of awareness, kind of like Rick Warren did when his son took his life.
So what would be your suggestion here in how you deal with that when we've got a church plant, okay? So let's say we got a church plant whose, main pastor, if you will, team leader, needs to take time off, needs the mental break, and maybe they're the only one that's getting a salary.
Yeah.
How do you deal with that when it's like, okay, well, we need someone else to step in, possibly up to a year, and by the way, we need them to also take no salary? Because this is a church plant. It's not like we got a lot of money floating around here just to, keep the old guy on and the new guy on. You know what I'm saying? Like, how do you deal with that?
It's interesting because I think that the number one thing, this is why we tell people, don't plant alone. You need a team. And my wife and I were talking about this a few months back that, in our history of church planting and talking about team leadership, what planners often do that we've noticed is they read a book like Church Zero, cha-ching, and then they'll kind of come around and say, oh yeah, totally team leadership, and they'll grab one other person. The problem with grabbing one other person and calling it a team is it's just you and one other person. So now suddenly, let's say that one other person is a human being and has a life. There's not a team. It's more like now when you go off, you dump everything on that person, right? And so you don't feel the freedom to do that. But if you have a true and proper team, multiple people that you can, say like a team of 4 or 5, 3's even better, but not ideal. But at that point, then you're not burdening the same people all the time. So when it comes time for you to take a leave of absence, you really have a team that can stand in for you. And what I found is we're really good at talking about team. We're just really bad at ensuring that it's there. And Ender and I have talked that if we ever were to go back to leading a network, because, New Breed Network is still there, being led by Matt Fretwell, but we no longer lead it, and if I were to go and lead it now, Ender and I have said that we would make sure before because we were always like empowering. We were always like, go, 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 go. And I think at this point, I would have a little bit of a kind of like Jesus, go, but wait first. Make sure you got everything you need. Of course, Jesus was telling them wait for the Holy Spirit. But I think I would say, make sure your team's in place. And I think Paul, to be honest, to be fair, in his trajectory of church planning, he's trying to go as fast as he can at first. And then when you see him start to build teams in his 3rd missionary journey out of Ephesus, he's trying to go as safe as he can. He's got that balance. He's still trying to go fast, but he's working smarter, not harder. He's gathered in one place all these guys to make a team, and then he sends them out in teams to plant out of Ephesus. And he's not going as fast, but in one sense, he's creating church plants that last longer and go the distance, or safer plants. And I think his impact therefore, because if I go fast and half my church plants fail, which has kind of been my track record in people that I send out, how fast am I really going? When you look at it in the test of time, well, I didn't go that fast, And so for me, I'm kind of starting to look back now and say, and Andrew and I, we came up with this together, that you have to have your team in place. You can't just be saying, I ascribe to team, I talk about team, but you have to say, I believe in team and I have my team. So that's the first thing. Second thing is, this is beyond your own team. I mentioned network. When you take a sabbatical, you ought to be able to reach out to other churches that you're in relationship with and say, hey, I'm going to be gone. So, for example, we had Refuge Long Beach is in the same network as another one of our churches, and that church is taking a sabbatical. And we immediately were able to send Mike Bonham over and say, hey, be there. And that pastor just gets to take a sabbatical knowing that there's another competent leader who's able to lead at another congregation standing in and stepping in.
I wondered why he was going over there.
Yeah, that's exactly why.
That's cool.
Mm-hmm. That's what a network is for. That's what it ought to be, that you can call. And if the team, if the leadership of the church that you're calling on has a team, they can sacrifice a team member for a time. It is a sacrifice, and it does cost that church that the person comes from, but that is one of the things. And then also too is help, getting counseling, getting help, getting, professional help. I do think that when a pastor has that, the church needs to collect for that. The church, if the guy's like, if I were in a church plant and I said, hey guys, because I got touched by depression for the first time in my life, personally. I've never been depressed. I'm like the buoyant bounce back kid, you knock me down. It's kind of like Rocky, when he goes, it ain't how hard you can hit. It's how much you can take the hits and keep going. That line there.
Yeah, you have to say it as incoherent and as not making any sense until you read between the lines as possible. That's how you do Sylvester Stallone.
That wasn't bad, was it?
It really was right. It was very accurate. It's very funny.
So, and so I'm like, that's basically how I've been. Like, you can knock me down for a day, but I'm going to get up and keep coming at it. It's like the Terminator. And, but, everybody has those moments. And for Paul, he writes about that where he says, we despaired even of life, and there are times that Paul, he uses the word despair there. I mean, that's some deep emotion there. And then he talks about, in that same letter, he talks about that, we were comforted, through our trials, and yada, yada, and the Lord came in, but he was in pain. And that's what he's trying to say is we were down. And then of course he says we're cast down, but not forsaken. He's doing all that. I got knocked out, but the bell didn't ding yet, and all of us have been there. But for me, I had my dark night of the soul that St. John of the Cross talks about. My mom died. I got back from watching her die in a hospital room, just kind of like the World War II medic saying, more morphine, having to stand there and watch that, because she said, I'm ready, and just having to watch her struggle for breath and die slowly over a period of hours. That was traumatic. Loved my mom. Then to having to sell every scrap of possessions that she owned quickly, because her house, we had to get rid of everything. Having to do that, like the emotional whirlwind that is, and just then have to hop on a plane and come back here. And, of course, never mind my house floods, like within a week of getting back. But, it was just a terrible time. And all the stress, like I remember coming back to my office and sitting there, and I literally, I don't remember what happened. I went in my office and I sat there, and I remember one day I went through my entire photo library and classified it. It's the only thing I can remember doing. And I remember, I think that was towards the tail end when I was starting to like kind of get my brains back, because I don't know how to put it, but I was in such shock. That's really what it was. I was in emotional shock. I remember going with the kids when the house flooded, and the kids would be playing in the pool, and I'd be like in a trance in the sauna. And my wife was super good to me at that time, because she wasn't like, hey, how come you're not talking to him? I think she could see like, he's not okay. He's not all right. And she was awesome through it. But I went into a deep depression after that. And I had to actually go talk to somebody. And say,
I'd just like to point out that someone was clearly not me.
Yes, no, it wasn't. There are certain things that you don't ask friends to do because it's just not fair to them.
Well, yeah.
This was beyond Pete's capacity.
And because you'd actually like to get some good advice. some compassion.
No,
which I'm not really known for compassion. Let's face it. I'm not.
No, you're not. But that has its value too, right? I had an elder that every Monday when I want to get neurotic and, poor Andreas Sunday night had to peel me off the floor, and then Monday morning would roll around. I'd be with the elder that I met with, and hey, you peel me off the floor. And he'd be like, no, suck it up. It was Jeff. If you read Reaching the Unreached, he was like a 1950s steelworking stud of a rugby player, turned prophet. And he was like, he's an older guy in his 70s. And he was like, hey, you guys suck it up, man. It was like, and I needed that. It was kind of like when, this is a bad metaphor and illustration, but like when Humphrey Bogart smacks just about every woman in every film he's in, snap out of it. It was one of those, and I needed one of those. Yeah, like that old comic with Robin.
That's definitely a bad metaphor to be using.
It is a bad metaphor, and I did say that. But it's okay. Maybe it's like the Batman meme.
If you ever run for office, they're going to be playing that clip all over CNN.
They will. But the point is I needed someone to smack me out of it. And but man, I tell you, I was scared. I was really scared because I'm a guy who likes to be in control. I'm super disciplined. I like to manage my schedule. I forward plan. In fact, it's funny because over the weekend, I accidentally sent an email to an employee, and we have this thing that says if you send a work email over the weekend, you get docked $5, and the person that reports you gets $5. So one of my coworkers wrote me back, "You owe me $5, haha." So I was like, dang, because I'm forward planning, I like things in their box. I'm a little anal retentive.
But do you get to then report them because they sent you an email over the weekend?
Well, that was kind of the joke, but I didn't send the email back because that's another $5.
Gotcha.
But I could text. There's no rule on texting.
That's funny.
But yeah, the funny, he said, hey, next time we're watching a movie on a trip, buy me a popcorn. So it's a deal. He didn't report me. Because that's kind of messed up. But anyways, all that to say, so I like to be in control of myself. And it's kind of like, when depression comes, you're powerless. There's nothing you can do. I mean, I was a psych nurse, and I would make depressed patients take showers because research shows that makes them feel better. We would make them get up and walk around. It's terrible because they need someone, and that the therapy of that is proven. It releases, and both of those things release endorphins that will overall improve the mood and physiologically help the brain. But the reality is, man, when it came, that's why I went and talked to the guy. I talked to him because I'm scared. I said, hey, man, I've never been through this. Every day I'm depressed. I despair. I can't see any hope. I can't see any light. I think about death a lot. And, a lot of you guys have never heard this, but I went through it, man. I went through it bad. And he was just like, hey, he was safe. He was professional. He was licensed. And I always like my counselors a little charismatic. That means a lot to me. The guy actually believes in the Holy Spirit. And he was like, hey, you just got to feel this, man. Like a guy like you're going to try to fight this. And he goes, and that's the worst thing you can do. He goes, think of it as like the tide. It's going to come and take you. And it's going to pull you out to sea for a bit. And when that happens, let the undertow pull you. Go with it. Don't fight it, because that'll wear you out and drown you quicker. He goes, just go with it. And in the midst of that, he said, you need to be asking the Lord, God, I'm here. I'm not going to deny I'm here. I'm not going to fight that I'm here. This is where I'm at. And, it's funny because he didn't say it at the time, but in hindsight, looking back on that, I'm like, you know what? It's exactly what David did. David went through all this crap. I mean, I live in a trailer. David lived in a cave. He didn't even have a trailer you could switch on a generator and get running water. I mean, he had it way worse than me. And, he was like, God, I'm done. He's like, Lord, they're going to kill me any minute. Like, you read, that guy's breaking his heart, man, in those Psalms. But he's going to God with them. And that's important. And, I'm sure this guy that took his life, sure he was going to God with it. He had a hashtag that was God's got this. And I believe he probably tried as much as he could to believe that up until the final moment. And who knows what his mind, it could have just been, he's like, God, you got this, but I'm too tired. I don't know what it is, but it's a tragedy, and he's in glory now. And as he's there, I know that he sees things from a different perspective. When you have depression, you have such tunnel vision. On one hand, you could judge him, like say, oh, you left 3 kids. How could you do that? You can't see or feel those things when you're in depression. You just can't. You can't process that. I've seen people so severely depressed that if a fly lands on them or a cockroach crawls on their face, they won't swipe it away. That's how gone they are. And it's just that they don't have the drive, motive, or ability. And dude, it's just, now that I've tasted just a fraction of it, it's, I mean, I could tell you everything about it scientifically, but I'd never been through it. And of course, Spurgeon writes about these things a lot. In answer, Pete, to your question. I know I'm going on and on, but Spurgeon really, he has a chapter in lectures of my students called The Minister's Fainting Fits. And a fainting fit he's not talking about when you faint in the pulpit because you're so like, doing the, and God said, that I'm going to, and then you just. And he said in that chapter, go ahead.
No, we lost you, but you're back now.
Are you serious? You lost me for what part?
Just right there, right before you said go ahead.
Oh. No, I was just saying, like he was talking about depression, not like fainting in the pulpit. And the interesting thing is Spurgeon went through deep, deep, dark depression, like really bad depression. So did Luther. I mean, we've chatted about all this, but Spurgeon, he knew what it was to lock himself away and not want to see anybody and just not be able to get out of bed. He struggled with that. And so towards the end of his life, it's something he never completely shook, but he learned to cope with better. There's all kinds of material written on this about Spurgeon, but he writes about it and he's honest about it. And in his Minister's Fainting Fits, he says things like, like he talks about how walks. He would walk home from the chapel. He wouldn't get a carriage because, again, that whole thing about the endorphins. He didn't know the science of it back then. But he said, if I get fresh air and I get a walk in, it helps me. Well, that's all scientifically proven now. He would garden. And as he was gardening, he would kind of mentally unwind a bit. That's why he would kind of like Rick Warren told us, Pete, if you work with your mind, work with your hands. Spurgeon would say every minister should have a garden. It is therapeutic. You get out there and you just put your mind and hands together, and it's a different kind of work.
And see, I really take that in modern times to say every pastor needs a Glock 19. Because it's very
it's funny
therapeutic.
You say that, though. There is actually, it's the same thing. It is actually the same thing.
Oh, I know it is. I totally know it is, because that's part of the reason why I go so often. I just want to get away from work.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're engaging your brain differently. You're completely shifting the pathways in your brain when you're engaging something like that. And by the way, that is also scientifically proven. So what happens in the pathways of the brain, I'm not going to go into a major science lesson here, but you have chemicals that travel. You have electrical impulses that travel across chemicals. So you have gaps in your neurons or synapses. That's what they're called. And they're like little cliffs that the electrical impulses need to jump across between cell to cell. And so they're called neuroreceptors. So when you say, oh, my synapse fired, that's saying that the electricity crossed over that gap. And you have neurochemicals that help transmit that electricity across that gap. That's where drugs come in. So if I'm anxious, I give somebody something that blocks those neurotransmitters or, the neurochemicals or neuroreceptors. So that's how those medications work. Well, when you're therapeutically doing something, what it's doing is it's taking the other pathways and it's building your brain's capacity to, particularly in depression, it's building in anxiety, it's building your brain's capacity to fire those synapses in a different way. And your brain needs that. It needs that break from routine, and it needs to shift the gears. And that's why we'll say things are therapeutic, because it literally will change how the brain works.
Yeah. Yeah, I tell you, I mean, we've talked about this before, the whole depression problem, if you will, that people have to deal with. And, I am so thankful that I don't personally have to deal with it the way that people who are going through it have to deal with it. Because I cannot even imagine having to go through that like that, where you're always depressed. Like, that's just not the way my brain functions. But I've got family members that have dealt with that their entire lives. And it is actually one of the things that concerns me a lot about my kids, because I know that it runs in my family. The whole depression, manic depressive, chemical imbalances. And
right.
And I worry about it, man. I'm like, you know,
Yeah.
are my kids going to be hit
and
with
the thing
this?
is if you have that chemical predisposition, then there's a trigger. So for me, I have a family history of addiction and alcohol. And so that is something that I remember when NAM, when I went to work for NAM, they're like, hey, you can't drink. And at the time, I remember thinking like, oh, that's lame, But I'll tell you what, man, it was very good for me when my mom died that I wasn't drinking.
Yeah, but I don't think you would have drank that much anyway, because you're not one that drinks to excess.
No, but I can remember before I started working for NAM, there was a little more alcohol getting poured. Not like I was secretly
not enough.
pouring, having a wee
as
little
a guy
in my office
as
every
a
day
guy
or anything
who
like that.
knows how to put down some drinks. I am telling you, you were nowhere near that. But I understand that. I get it.
No, but it's not that. It's
Yeah.
more. It's more with alcoholism. It's why you do it, right? It's that whole never drink alone thing. It's that it's been a tough day. I think I'll pour a drink. That's where the danger is, and I've always been extremely sensitive to that within myself. I would talk to Andrea when I would have those inklings and say, hey, because Andrea and I are pretty honest about stuff, like if I have some, I'm going to tell her, you know what I mean? Like better to just tell my best friend and my partner and my, she's sitting right here. So I'm saying all these lovely things about her. But it's better to tell her because she is the one God has put in my life to be there when I'm struggling. And so, to just right up front say, hey, I'm drinking more than I should be right now. And I'm a little worried about myself. I'm just telling you this so that I have accountability. Like that's what you need to be doing. You need that
what's
with
funny
your spouse.
is as you're saying that, I'm thinking about this conversation. What would happen if I had that conversation with Jamie? What was funny is in that instant, I was like, she would say to me the exact same thing I'd say to her. Stop drinking. I was like,
that is so your guys' relationship.
wow, we really are right for each other.
She'd be like, suck it up, man.
Pretty much. Yeah. Be great.
But, you tend, but that's okay because that's your guys' rhythm, And, here's the thing, man, is at the end of the day, you're going to need people. You're going to need friends. You're going to need people outside of the church that don't judge you. I think if your only support system is the place you work, a.k.a. the church, unless you're a Bible planner or minister, BibleInnerCircle.com. Tom Peyton sent you. Extra commission from me, right, Pete?
Sure.
And, but I mean, honestly, you need people outside of that catchment to be there with you. And guys, the other thing is don't for a second buy the lie that happens. When this happens, you always, the interesting thing about suicide is when someone commits suicide, it plants a very strong alternative to, in people's minds. Like, for example, when someone in a high school commits suicide, there will usually be follow-up suicides on top of that. I wouldn't be surprised if the temptation to commit suicide with people struggling with temptation, hearing this will get worse because it suddenly presents itself as a conceivable alternative to suffering. It's right there as a ready-made solution, and that's the danger of it. And I would just say to anyone struggling, don't buy that lie. Don't look at it as, hey, I need to. That's going to be me. That's where the enemy. That's where your own thoughts will come in. If you are depressed, you have morbid thoughts, anyways. You have hopeless thoughts. You have thoughts that are very cynical and defeatist. You need to fight through those. And the best thing you could probably do, just something that you could do immediately on this call. We've talked about prayer. We've talked about friends. We've talked about help. We've talked about, things you can physically do. But one of the other things that you can do that costs you nothing and is completely anonymous is to call the suicide prevention hotline. You just call them and tell them they don't need to know your name. They don't need to know where you are. They're not going to send the SWAT team hunting after you. You can just call and talk.
What do they do on those calls?
They listen to you.
Is that all it is? They just talk?
Yeah, and if you're really in a place of danger, they'll tell you, hey, you need to call 911. And but they're not. It's a non-threatening alternative. You call them and you talk to them and say, I want to kill myself. And they're not going to be like, oh my gosh, it's not like calling 911. That's what they're there for. They're there to hear you, and they're there to talk to you. And that's what they're equipped to do. And, think about the person that says, you know what, I'm going to be there. They're usually people that have lost somebody to suicide, and they do care. They're there because
before we cut out, let's also address the question, because we're dealing with people in ministry, what happens or what steps should they take? Should someone in their church, family member, friend, whatever, come to them and say, I'm thinking about suicide? What should they do? Yeah.
So that one is very, very tough, because you have a legal responsibility as a minister. There's two things. One is ideation. There's two things that you look for as a someone in the psych field. They both begin with the letter I. There's suicidal ideation, and there's suicidal intent. So the ideation is, I'm thinking about suicide. I want to commit suicide. The suicidal intent is, I have a plan and a time and a place. And so what we assess when we're talking to people is the ideation first. How long has this been? What do you think? What are you thinking about? Yada, yada. Then we move into the intent. How have you thought about how you're going to do it? Have you thought about when? Do you have and we start asking all that. And then we ask them, have you attempted before? And yada, yada. And often, people that even attempt suicide, it's not what they really want. They just don't want to feel what they're feeling. That's the saddest thing about it, is people who commit suicide don't really want to die. And I think that's the most heartbreaking thing about it. So when you're looking at it as a pastor, if it's suicidal ideation, you get them help in the form of counseling, and you listen to them, and you get them treatment. If it's suicidal intent, that's why we have something which is, I am going to commit suicide. Like, if I leave this office here, I'm going to go hang myself. Then you say, okay, well, look, I'm here for you. Let's get you the help you really need, which is let's get you into a place right now that's going to keep you safe. And you call, but I don't have insurance. Oh well, it's like, and you don't call the center. You need to call. Really, you call the police, and you can call an ambulance. But just call 911. Tell them, I have someone here who, needs to be kept safe. They're a danger to themselves. And then someone might say, well, what if they run out of my office? Well, they might run out of your office.
Still call.
Then I feel bad because they came to me as a pastor. Well, you're going to feel worse when they end up dead. And you think, well, they came to my office and I didn't do anything, and they went home and hung themselves. And that happens. And so, people in my church, I do tell them, look, if you come to me and you talk to me, I will help you through it to the best of my ability. But if I feel that I can't help you, then we will get you treatment. And, you sometimes have people who they have a disorder, a psychiatric disorder, or more of a personality disorder, like borderline personality disorder. That personality disorder uses suicidal threat or threat of suicidal harm as a means of seeking attention. And so what they'll do is they form a codependency with someone like a pastor or someone in pastoral authority, and they'll do this, and you'll see it. Once you start learning all this stuff, you start seeing it, And what I've learned to do as a pastor is I tell them, if you come to me once, we will get you treatment. If you come to me twice with this, the next time we will put you on a hold, a legal hold, a 48-hour hold, because, that's what you're going to need. So I let people know that I right away perceive their personality disorders, that, hey, I have a responsibility. And you do have a legal responsibility. It's like if a teacher is approached by a child who says, I'm going to kill myself, they have a legal obligation. They can go to jail for not reporting that. It's the same thing as if someone comes and says, I'm being physically abused by my husband or my parents. You don't have a choice anymore. And so in that sense, I'm not saying you got to call the police because someone comes to you and says, I'm going to kill myself. I'm saying you look at ideation and you look at intent and you make the judgment. You still have to get them help. And so the question is, who are you going to call? So in that case, you get them in to see a psychiatrist or a therapist. You start with a therapist, perhaps, if you're not that concerned. And then the therapist some therapists can prescribe medication, others cannot. So it just depends, and if they feel it's above their head, they'll refer them to a psychiatrist. So that's how it works.
Well, cool, man. I'm grateful that you shared all that.
Yeah, and if you guys are ministers and you don't know where to turn, you can write us. I know we joked around about Nigerian princes writing us all the time, but we would want to hear from you guys. And if there's something Pete and I can do to help you, by all means, write in.
And when he says us, he really means Peyton.
Yeah, but the thing is that I don't want to read another headline.
Yeah.
Like I read. I mean, my heart's just going out to him. I wish I knew him. I wish I could have, part of me thought, because he was a church planner at one time, part of me thought, did he listen to this show? He's not far. I know a lot of people that know him. It's possible that at some time or another, he was a podcast listener here and heard things. Are there things that we could have shared? So, all those things that I just think, I know that when I look at the numbers of people that, I just looked yesterday, Pete, the number of people that listen to this podcast, I know that there are others out here right now listening to this podcast that say, I'm not too far from that.
Sure.
And, so let me just do something we don't normally do on here, Pete, and I just want to pray.
Sure. Lord,
we just lift up any of our podcast listeners that are struggling and in even what John Bunyan called the slough of despair, that place where they can't get out of the swamp and they're trying to get out. Lord Jesus, even David said in Psalm 40 that he was in a dark and slimy pit, that he couldn't crawl out. And he said, but I waited, and I waited for the Lord on high, and he heard my cry, and he reached down and he pulled me out. And Lord, I know when David's talking about that he felt powerless, and all he could do was call to you. And I pray for those that find themselves today in the same place, with the same just pain and struggle and hopelessness. I pray that you would break through and show them even their thoughts are a part of the chemicals going on in their brain. That negativity, it's not reality. It's not real. They feel it. It's strong, but it's not truth. And so, Lord, I just pray that you would break through for them, set them free, Lord. I ask, Jesus, that they would get the help they would have. If they don't have the friends, ministers can be lonely. Pray that they would reach out to anybody that they can trust. And, Lord, that you would help them, even if it is that we get an email or a text or whatever it is, Lord. I pray that you would just help prevent anyone in that situation, Lord, from following suit and going the same route. And for that family, Lord, we do pray for the family of that minister and for that church and for the people that were there praying for him and hoping for him and waiting for him to return. We do ask, Jesus, that you would just minister to them, draw near to all of them, Lord. I know it's going to hurt for a long time. And those poor kids, Lord, it's going to hurt and it's going to affect them deeply. But we pray for your grace, Lord. We pray for your presence. In Jesus' name, amen.
All right, man. Why don't you do our typical sign-off?
So, hey, guys, we do have another sponsor, SimplifyChurch.com. They are designated to pay attention to the stuff that you don't have time for, like bookkeeping, like payroll, like tax compliance with the IRS. And they're there for you guys. It's simplifychurch.com. Let them know that Peyton and Pete sent you, and ask them if you can get a discount for that. I'm just on a roll with our sponsors today, aren't I? You know what's better than having Simplify Church? Hiring a full-time treasurer. No, I'm just teasing. That's a terrible idea. Because simplifychurch.com is cheap. And they'll sort you out. They're former church planners. So check them out, simplifychurch.com. And this has been the Church Planner Podcast. Peyton Jones, Pete Mitchell, reminding you, if you want to reach the ones nobody's reaching, you need to go where nobody's going and do what nobody's doing.
I love you, man.
Thanks for joining us for another weekly episode of the Church Planner Podcast with Pete Mitchell and Peyton Jones. We'd love to hear your comments on this episode of the Church Planner Podcast. Visit us online and let us know what you thought at churchplannerpodcast.com. If you subscribe to us via iTunes and have enjoyed the podcast, leave us a positive review. The more positive reviews we receive in iTunes, the more iTunes will promote us to other church planners who would benefit from this show. This podcast is brought to you by the Church Planner Magazine, which is available in the iTunes newsstand or online via churchplannermagazine.com.